The Brooklyn Nets, going into this series, they weren't the favorites. The Celtics have been one of the hottest teams in basketball in the second half of the season. Tatum should have been an MVP candidate. He's been sensational in the second half. He had a terrible first half. Jaylen Brown was killing it. And then after the All-Star break, I don't know what happened to Tatum, but he just took it to a whole nother level. One of the hottest players in all of basketball for like 2 months. But not only that, the Boston Celtics all season long have been the number one defense in almost every single overall number in the NBA. There is no Ben Simmons right now because he's hurt or he's eating Twinkies on the sideline or something or drinking his Coke. Who knows what he's doing? Or maybe he's hanging out with one of the Kardashians. Going into this series, you would think that Kyrie Irving has a lot to prove. A guy that has been booed plenty of times since he has jumped ship from Boston to Brooklyn. A lot of the Boston fans are not fond of Kyrie Irving because Kyrie Irving, when he was there, told the Boston Celtics that he would like to stay there, that he would like to be a Boston Celtic for life. And then after the season was over, he jumped ship. There were stories coming out that he was going to New York and then decided to go to Brooklyn with the great and powerful KD. And KD did not look good in game number 1. Looked like he didn't even want to play. And I know everybody looks at his numbers. He scored 23 points. That is not KD-like. He was forcing up threes throughout the game. He just didn't look like he was in a good flow. Kyrie Irving took over the game for the Brooklyn Nets at one point. The Brooklyn Nets took over after a 16-point deficit in the fourth quarter, came back, were up 6 or 7 points with 3 or 4 minutes left. The Celtics were playing catch-up, a 4-point lead with a minute and a half left of the game. They kept a 2-point lead with 2.5 seconds left, and then they got fouled and couldn't hit foul shots. And then all of a sudden, Tatum gets up, he shoots a layup right over Kyrie Irving because he can't defend. And the Celtics win. Game number 2, Kyrie Irving doesn't show up. And Kevin Durant hits some shots, especially in the fourth quarter. But again, this team does not have any bench help. This team does not play quality defense. And that's why Ben Simmons is so very important in this series. And that's why they have to rush him back. Now, there are stories coming out that Ben Simmons should be back in game 4. But it could be too little too late because if they lose game 3, it doesn't matter if Ben Simmons comes back. You look at this series, and I know a lot of people think the Celtics are that much better than the Nets. They're not. Now, the Nets are the veteran team. The Nets arguably have the 2 best players in the series. I think Kyrie Irving has proven to be a top-end offensive player in the playoffs. We all know what Kevin Durant has done. He's won 2 championships. He was 2-time MVP in those playoffs. He's a fantastic playoff player. So you can't make any excuses for Kevin Durant, and you can't make any excuses for Kyrie Irving, who also won a championship with the Cavaliers and was a big part of it too. But what you see, Speedy, with the Boston Celtics is you got a young, hungry Tatum, a young, hungry Jaylen Brown. You have a young Marcus Smart, who won Defensive Player of the Year. Congratulations to him. This team is driving on all cylinders right now.
Yeah, and you could tell, too, that they play a good identity of basketball, too. I think even though they switched over from Brad Stevens to Ime Udoka as coaching, a lot of those system of ball movement, a lot of the system of smart shooting, even when their offense hasn't been the potent offense, it's still getting production and it's still been efficient. A lot of depth in this game from their young players, too. Guys like Grant Williams stepping up, Peyton Pritchard, and Marcus Smart offensively, too. I really think has been the X factor in the series because that's not what he's known for. He scored 20 points in game 1, scored 12 points, and had 5 assists in game number 2. Tatum and Brown, they're going to do their thing, but even Tatum, it took him a while to get going in game 2. The Nets shut him down for much of the first half, and Jaylen Brown was kind of streaky throughout that game too, offensively speaking, but got it going late. The defense was the big thing though, because the Nets had an 8-point lead in the fourth quarter of game 2 and only scored 2 points for like 6 minutes straight. And for a team that's as potent offensively as the Nets are supposed to be, that's inexcusable. Now Kyrie Irving went off the way he did in game 1, both on the court and with his gestures to the Boston crowd that has been hostile in the past.
But you love it. You love that he has that personality. I know he loves when he gets booed and when he's scoring and he's sticking it to him, but he shouldn't be doing the things on and off the court.
Yeah,
he's taking it too far.
Yeah, that was a bit of a new extreme. The Celtics fans, we didn't hear anything that was like derogatory like we've seen Russell Westbrook in the past, like Donovan Mitchell we've seen from Utah fans in the past, and we've seen from Boston fans with Kyrie Irving a couple years ago too when he first was on the Nets.
Boston fans are not very nice people.
But that instance didn't occur in this game. It was mainly just heckling at that point, booing, and Kyrie Irving took it to the latest extreme with that. And then I guess it got in his head a bit in game 2. He really struggled badly to score the basketball. And Kevin Durant, not efficient either. They both combined 8 for 30 too, which the Nets are never going to win if they have that kind of identity. Yes, Bruce Brown had the one scoring spurt in the game. You can't expect that to happen every single time. Meanwhile, the Celtics had a lot of guys you could trust to score the basketball. which the Nets clearly don't have. And Ben Simmons, even if he does come back, they're going to have to win game 3 without him. And you still have to try to get some level of a defensive identity because Ben Simmons doesn't provide much offensively either.
If the Brooklyn Nets win game number 3 and Ben Simmons comes back, they have a chance. Ben Simmons could really take away some of the deficiencies they have defensively. And if Ben Simmons was playing in that game number 1 and he was defending Tatum, Tatum doesn't score. And Brooklyn wins game number 1. And right now, this series could be 1-1 right now. And then we could be talking about a completely, totally different series right now for the Brooklyn Nets. But it's 2-0 right now. They're going back to Brooklyn. Kevin Durant is going to have a 40-point game against Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart for them to have a chance to win game number 3. Because Kyrie Irving, I think they figure out what they need to do with Kyrie Irving. They keep him on the perimeter. If he's not hitting his shots throughout the game, he's going to pass the ball, and he's going to probably pass it to Kevin Durant because nobody else can hit a shot except Seth Curry, which tells you the depth on the Brooklyn Nets is not good. Now, even if Ben Simmons comes back, he's a defensive guy. He's not an offensive guy. We all know he can't shoot. He can get to the hole. He's a good passer. He's a good facilitator. For his size and his ability, he would be a fantastic all-around point guard. He's not a shooter. He's not going to be that guy that's going to give you 30 points like a Russell Westbrook has or James Harden has or even a Kyrie Irving. What he could do is he could play the point position. He can draw a lot of small guys to defend him, which creates mismatches for Kevin Durant and sometimes Kyrie Irving. It might be a great thing to see Ben Simmons get on the court as soon as possible, but remember, it's going to take Ben Simmons a little bit to get his sea legs on the court. He hasn't played in over a year. That puts him in position where he's going to get tired a little bit quicker. And how many minutes is he going to play? 15? That's not enough, especially against this Boston Celtic team that could score and also play defense. So it's going to be very interesting.
And also, you're going to really trust Steve Nash to manage his minutes, right?
Well, let's not talk about Steve Nash either, who's been absolutely horrible in this series. But we expected it. Steve Nash is not a good man.
He's a figurehead coach. Yeah.
He's not a good coach. He took this job because he got a chance to coach Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, 2 of the best players in the NBA, 2 of the top 10 players in the NBA. But as good as Kyrie Irving is, Kyrie Irving has made mistakes on and off the court, and you see what he did. He got fined for $50,000 because of what he did to the Boston fans, flipping them, and when he walked to the locker room telling the fans to go F themselves. Throughout this playoff now, this is the best part of the NBA season. If you look in the Eastern Conference right now, Miami and Atlanta, Miami is just completely destroying Atlanta. And the reason why they're completely destroying Atlanta is not as dominant as they've been, for the last 2 years. I've told everybody about Nate McMillan. I didn't think he was a good coach last year. He hit lightning in a bottle. Young is one of the more prolific offensive players in the league, but teams know that now. So what do? They double team him and make the other players beat him. And they're not a good offensive team. They're just not. But this series is as good as done. Miami has been the best team in the Eastern Conference this year, and they're going to move on in this series. They're going to have to probably play the Philadelphia 76ers, the James Harden-less Philadelphia 76. I know everybody's going to say James Harden is playing. He is playing, but he might as well sit the bench or he might as well not play because he hasn't shown up in the playoffs.
No, they've done better as a team when he's a third option. And that's the approach that the Sixers have succeeded with.
Could you believe that?
Embiid and Maxey are 1-2.
One of the best players in the NBA is a third option. You have a kid in Maxey who is a better option than James Harden in the playoffs. What does that tell you about James Harden?
Inefficiency.
I know they're playing a restless Toronto Raptors team that are not the same Toronto Raptors team that won an NBA championship a couple of years ago. Kyle Lowry right now is playing for Miami as a backup point guard. And this Toronto team is depending on Siakam to do everything. And I was very surprised Toronto was a 5th seed. They played very well this year with some of the deficiencies they had. You give them a lot of credit, but they're done in that series. It's going to be Miami and Philadelphia in the second round. And I expect that to be a fun series. Milwaukee, I thought they were going to breeze right through Chicago, especially the way Chicago has played throughout the second half of the season. DeRozan hasn't played well. Levine has played a little bit better than most of the players on this team. But this is not a team that you can honestly say going into the playoffs they were hot. They weren't. They were the number 1 seed going into the All-Star break and then fell out of it. Now they're the 6th seed, and they were one of the worst teams in the second half of the season. But they're in the playoffs, and they're very lucky because Middleton gets hurt in game number 2. They squeak out the win, and now the series is 1-1. And there's a lot of pressure on the Greek Freak, and that does, he's going to have to do more. Other players are going to have to do more. And who does this benefit? It benefits the more depthful Chicago Bulls. They're missing some players as well. They're missing their big point guard in Ball. I don't know how big he is, but he's had a decent season. He's not the prolific offensive player like Kyrie Irving is, but he's a good player. He definitely gives them that defensive side. He's a big guard who could defend multiple positions. So losing a guy like Lonzo Ball for maybe this round, it definitely affects them.
Yeah, Milwaukee's going to have to patch the other scoring depth together, too, because Middleton was the second best scorer on them throughout the regular season by over a 2-point margin. Drew Holiday was third, but he's better as a facilitator type role. He had a really rough game, too, especially in the fourth quarter. Bobby Portis has been good in the second half of the season. We've seen some flashes from Grayson Allen. That's
unbelievable.
Yeah, he's actually rebirthed himself nicely in the NBA. Brook Lopez has shown flashes.
Old man Brook.
They need those guys to be better, like, as a unit. They can't have it be one guy each game, too, because Chicago is a good defensive team. So if Giannis does everything, and we've seen him get bracketed at time, we've seen him when they force him to shoot, it's not the same. Look at what Miami did to him in the bubble. I'm not saying Chicago has those exact capabilities, but they are a good enough defensive team where if they don't have that other depth, Milwaukee, to score, they might have some problems.
Every team in the West is licking their lips right now because Phoenix lose one of their big scorers in Devin Booker for 2 to 3 weeks. What does that do? Definitely affects where this Western Conference is heading. That series, who would have thought that the series with the Pelicans is tied 1-1? CJ McCollum, some of the young players over there, they do not have Williamson, but this team is still a prolific offensive team. And with Phoenix losing that particular player, could the Pelicans shock the world and have one of the biggest NBA upsets and knock off the number 1 seed, Phoenix Suns? I believe that it could happen. Now, especially with the deficiencies that Phoenix has had in game number 2 with their offense.
The good thing for the Pelicans is that you saw even in game 1, even when Booker was playing, the bench unit for the Pelicans actually outplayed the bench unit for the Suns, which the Suns are so deep that should never happen with Cameron Payne, Landry Shamet they just traded for, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. They got all kinds of depth even beyond their stars. But we've seen teams in the past in the NBA playoffs do well even with stars out. So I'm not too worried about the Suns. We saw the Clippers last year without Kawhi Leonard still make it all the way to the Western Conference Finals. We've seen Miami without a lot of their top players do well and not necessarily winning it all, but still being pesky for the Pelicans. They can't just coast and they can't just be overconfident just because Devin Booker is out, because this team for the Suns is still loaded and as deep as it gets.
That Dallas series, I know Dallas was the higher seed, but Utah throughout the last couple of years have been one of the more dominant teams in the Western Conference. And with Donovan Mitchell and the coach possibly being fired, all the different accolades that have been going around in Utah, you would think this team was going to show up in this Dallas series. They really haven't played well. Dallas, who would have thought that Dallas and Brunson, who's playing great basketball right now, who's a free agent, by the way, and the Knicks have been recruiting. Julius Randle's recruited. He's over there with Worldwide West and Allen Houston trying to recruit Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson. So who knows what's going to happen in the offseason. But this Dallas series is not surprising. Luka Doncic, obviously, is the superstar player in this series. And I really think Dallas is just going to roll right through Utah. I think Utah's done. They don't look like the Utah Jazz team we've seen over the last couple of years. They just look lost.
Yeah, they look like they just don't really care. Checked out. Seen Donovan Mitchell already forcing his way out already. And Quinn Snyder, he's probably going to get another job even if he loses the Utah job. But still, this team doesn't look interested right now. Dallas, with Luka Doncic in and out with injury, too, has also gotten their depth to outplay Utah's depth, which should never happen. You got guys like Max Kleber playing well, and Dorian Finney-Smith, and in addition to the other top players, we've seen Spencer Dinwiddie play well and Brunson, like you mentioned, but all these new guys for Dallas coming through, Utah should have a big advantage depth-wise, and they don't. And yeah, it seems like Dallas is just going to really coast in this series. Whether they go further or not is another question, but overcoming the injuries so far, the best that we've seen when Luka hasn't been on the court, but so far so good, and yeah, Utah just looks disinterested.
And then there's Golden State and Denver. And if you want to say just complete dominance in that series, say it, because I feel bad for Denver. No Murray. Why he's not playing, I don't know. He's supposedly healthy now. He obviously doesn't think he's in basketball shape. Porter, if this series goes a little bit further, he could show up in this series, and that could benefit Denver. But this Denver team is not at full strength. They haven't been at full strength all season. And Jokic, who has been one of the best players in the league, MVP candidate again, and could win it, taking all the pressure on from this team. team this is a G League team that is a 6 seed in a very hard Western Conference. You have to give a lot of credit to the coaching and Jokic, who's been one of the more dominant players in the league. It's just a shame they don't have any depth, Speedy.
Yeah, it's a team that's been so good with depth for years, but it's really hard when you lost 2 key pieces like that.
Two of the biggest pieces of the team.
When you're playing an offense as potent as we've seen Golden State be, it's going to be very hard to make up that kind of scoring, and the Joker's done all he could. He's played his butt off this series, but they just haven't gotten any help.
They're double and triple teaming him. They're not giving him any chances.
Even
on the
in
boards.
a game where Golden State in Game 3 didn't look their best either, they still couldn't steal it. Just they don't have enough offense.